Hello, everyone. We're back with another episode of It's Case with a very special guest, Dr. Brian Sutterer,
Hey guys.
He's a physician in training for
physical medicine and rehabilitation, otherwise known as PM&R. He's been creating YouTube videos, racking up a total of 22 million views, discussing player injuries for the average sports fan to understand. His goal is to become the Sanjay Gupta of sports medicine.
Welcome, Dr. Brian Sutterer.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you all having me on to talk about some sports and just hopefully learn a little bit more.
Okay, so let's get started. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your background at Indiana University School of Medicine.
I actually started down a very different path. I went to school for engineering before medical school, and so I had zero intention of becoming a doctor when I started undergraduate. I studied mechanical engineering. And then about halfway through, I started to kind of realize that the human body is a machine, the same way, a car engine or a plane engine is a machine. But it was to me much more interesting to kind of learn about that biologic machine, so to speak, instead of, I had some internships at, airplane engine companies. So I took some of the prerequisites for med school and really liked it. I ended up actually not getting into medical school the first year that I applied. And so I went and worked for a year as an engineer and then went back and got my master's degree in biomedical engineering. And then thankfully got into medical school the second time around. And so I was at Indiana University School of Medicine, grew up in Indiana, so it was my hometown school. And really initially thought I wanted to do orthopedic surgery. It kind of fit really well with being an engineer and wanting to kind of blend that biomechanics and have some of that sports experience. But when I got into med school, I realized I was not fit to be a surgeon. It's really stressful hours. It's really busy. And I just didn't want to have that much of a sacrifice for the rest of my life. And so came across PM&R. It's physical medicine and rehabilitation. And it's very cool. It's kind of like non-operative sports sports medicine, orthopedic type stuff. So we take care of a lot of patients who have like bone and joint injuries or muscle injuries. And then on the rehab side of things, we take care of patients who have had strokes or spinal cord injuries or, traumatic brain injuries, handling the medical rehabilitation side of the disabilities that they have. So it's a really broad specialty, but lets you have a great lifestyle outside of medicine. Certainly it's what affords me the time to, have my YouTube channel. And I played sports when I was younger. I played basketball in high school for just my freshman year. I then switched into tennis. And so I played tennis pretty competitively throughout high school, tried to play my first year of college, but then injured my elbow and actually had to have Tommy John surgery as a freshman in college. And so that kind of derailed my tennis future. But, I love sports. I love following sports. I still am pretty active myself. And I also like educating people. And so the YouTube channel was a perfect opportunity to both educate people about medicine and the human body, while also getting people interested in sports. And so if you, just try to teach somebody about an ACL tear, it's kind of hard to get people excited. But if you can teach about an ACL tear because Klay Thompson just had an ACL tear, suddenly people are interested and people want to learn. And so it's a great kind of bridge to get people to learn more. So it's been a lot of fun and definitely gotten lucky along the way with the success.
For sure. So follow-up question, favorite sports team?
Favorite sports team, Kentucky Wildcats basketball. Okay. So I lived in Kentucky when I was like young grade school, kindergarten age. And that was kind of the first sports team I started following. And so if I had to, wear any jersey, put any poster up on my wall, it would be a UK basketball jersey. But other than that, I don't really have a specific NBA or NFL team. I try to follow all of them and not be too biased. I'll watch any game. I'll watch UFC. I'll watch golf, soccer, whatever's on, just to stay up to date with stuff. But definitely UK basketball.
So you're a sports enthusiast like us.
For sure. Yeah. There's almost too much to keep track of nowadays.
That's true.
Yeah.
But it's been a little weird with the little break we've had.
Yeah, for sure. It's been tough. There's certainly not as much going on, and it's been great to see stuff come back so far. Yeah. Knock on wood, everything has been going pretty well in terms of the sports leagues coming back. And, the NBA's got a whole other challenge coming up for them.
Definitely. So another question is, when you started your YouTube channel, you began making with medical student advice videos. What made you transition from medical student advice videos to sports videos?
I originally wanted to do sports videos when I first started the channel, but I didn't want to do just that because I didn't think it would really be enough content for people. When I first started, I was in my intern year, and so I was doing more kind of typical, hospital medicine services, working in the ICU and the emergency department, those sorts of things. And it was a good outlet to provide some of that education to other students coming up kind of behind me, and then share some more awareness about the PM&R field, because it's not very well known or well understood. And so I remember the first video I made was about Markel Fultz after he was diagnosed with thoracic outlet syndrome. And I thought, perfect opportunity. I had an easier night from work, and so I had the time to do it. And people loved it. And so I thought, well, great. This is what I wanted to really kind of talk about most of the time anyway. So perfect time to transition. And I miss talking about the PM&R and kind of the medical stuff sometimes, but now I feel like my audience is too far shifted to the sports side of stuff that, nobody would care if I, talked about rehab or something like that. So
I'm a Sixers fan myself. I'm a Philly fan, so Sixers, Eagles, and you've covered all of the the Philly injuries. So
the Sixers have given a lot of content. It's been between Embiid and Simmons, and then the Eagles, what Zach Ertz went through was crazy with his kidney, and it was a wild season for
I know. One
Philly
video
fans.
I really enjoyed myself was the Carson Wentz back injury, where you compared it to a paperclip. I thought that was very intriguing.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's something that one of my attendings in medical school somewhere along the way showed me. That it's just a good way to get the person you're talking to kind of realize that idea of that fatigue. That was one of the videos I did, and I thought it was really cool, and then it didn't do very well. And God, did people not like it or something? So that's cool. I appreciate you saying that.
Well, that's awesome how you explain like PM&R more to like the lay person and gain awareness for the field. Because I know a lot of student pharmacists as well as pharmacists are trying to engage the awareness of sports medicine in pharmacy. So do you think a pharmacist can be a key member in a sports medicine team, especially with the importance of anti-doping and knowing the importance of the banned substance list?
Yeah, I think so. The experiences that I've had personally so far, just helping cover different sports events through my residency, I haven't seen, but that's all been high school, kind of very junior level, not elite level of sports. And so I'm not 100% sure how it is right now in terms of how a pharmacist is involved. But, with all of the different challenges that are out there with different medications, with like the doping rules and all the different interactions in medicines, it's a lot of stuff to keep straight. And when there's already a lot of burden on the sports physician to take care of injuries and handle that sort of thing, it's hard to add on all these complex challenges with the medications. And so I think if it's not currently, I think that would be a good opportunity to be able to help, kind of take some of that stress away from the physicians and the players, and rely on the expertise of a pharmacist to know, all the different meds that are banned or approved and special indications. I mean, it's a lot to keep straight.
And especially with players like DeAndre Ayton and John Collins, to claim that they didn't know what they were taking in their body, it's like
yeah, that's always tough. I mean, it's, who knows? I know there's, rumors you'll read about, what people are taking and why they're taking it. It's, as a pharmacy student, it's not that hard to figure out some of the uses for some of these things. But it's tough, man. I mean, these athletes just have such competitive demand to excel and be their best. And, even all the stuff with the substance abuse with, marijuana, that's a whole other area of discussion with pain control and the role for medical marijuana and CBD and stuff like that. So I think when you look at just the medication kind of landscape in sports down the road, I think that's going to be one of the biggest transitions. Is just how we'll see, medical marijuana for pain relief start to kind of take more of, I think, an appropriate place around sports to hopefully limit the exposure to opiates and, the chronic NSAIDs, anti-inflammatories that these guys are taking.
Yeah. Okay, so the NBA is set to return in about a month. They just released a 100-page document talking about it.
Yeah.
So how do you think the players are going to react to coming back from an extended break, like with injuries and all that?
I think the timing, it's getting close to the amount of time off that players would have during kind of the transition from the end of a regular season to the start of the next season. The challenge is that these guys didn't really know what to be doing during the downtime because of the unknown. And then a lot of them didn't have access to the gear that you need to kind of stay in shape. And so, anytime in any sport, you're ramping up your activity and starting a season, or starting the playoffs, where suddenly you're not going to take a game off. You're going to go every single night. Anytime you have this acute or sudden increase in your workload, you're going to be at risk of getting hurt. What I'm more curious to see is what actually happens kind of towards the middle and the end of next season. Because if the season, 2021 season starts at the beginning of December, some of those teams in the playoffs are only going to have maybe a month, if
true.
that, a month and a half to really get somewhat of a break. And that isn't really enough time to get a true good kind of deceleration in your activity and then have to really quickly ramp it back up. And so I feel like those guys are going to have to just kind of maintain some workload throughout that, mid-October to December time point. And then it's going to just kind of tack on these few extra months to the continuing season next year. And so it'll be interesting to see playoffs next year, just because these guys are going to have a much kind of longer workload period that I don't know if we've really seen before. So I think that'll be a little bit more interesting. But certainly, yeah, I mean, with the coronavirus stuff, there's going to be so many unexpected things pop up and things to have to watch out for down in Orlando.
Yeah, I also feel like with this happening now, it's going to increase the load management aspect we see that Kawhi's been doing for a while now.
Yeah, that the whole load management thing is a whole other topic that's gotten a lot of headlines recently. And the thing people often misunderstand with the load management is it's not about rest, and it's not about just like pure minutes. I mean, people think load management, hit a minute threshold, sit out. There's so much more to it, where you actually need to have an appropriate amount of load. And so we know that if you have too little workload, you're at risk of getting injured. But if you have too high of workload, you're also at risk. And so everybody wants to stay away from that high workload period. But then if you swing it too far to where you're not adequately loading a player, then you're still going to be at risk of getting hurt. And so it's not about limiting the load. It's about managing the appropriate type of load and the appropriate amount of load. But yeah, I mean, now, you see the rings that these guys are supposedly going to be wearing when the season restarts. I mean, all these teams are just data crazy, wanting to get their hands on any sort of objective measurement they can. And, it's tough to say how much of an advantage it's going to give them. But, I guess data is data, and we'll see what happens.
Mm-hmm. Also, they're talking about testing every day, and how do you think that's going to be sustainable with results not being immediate?
Yeah, so it's hard to predict. I had a tweet out the other day about the company that it seems like they're going to be working with. I think it's Quest Diagnostics.
Yeah.
If you go to their website, they report a 2 to 3 day turnaround time. And of course, people will say, well, the NBA is just going to make a deal with them and pay them more money and get their test back in a day, which I hope isn't the case. I hope the NBA has kind of more sense to know that they shouldn't be prioritizing asymptomatic pro athletes over, the general public down in that area that need to have their tests back, especially with the increase in the number of cases down there lately. So we'll see. The problem, I think, is if you're going to have to wait 2 to 3 days for results, that's too much of a delay, in my opinion, to safely put guys on the court when you've got a test pending. I mean, that's going to be, if it comes back positive, now you've got potentially a 3-day span where you've, might have really missed some opportunities to limit exposure. So I'm guessing they've got some way of getting testing kind of within that 24-hour period so that you can, test early enough to where before you go to your next game, you've gotten the results back before putting guys on the court. But we'll see what happens with it. I think, they estimated 15,000 tests, maybe a month ago when all this was first coming out, and doing the math with just 35 players per team getting tested every day, it's something like 52,000 tests that they're going to need. And, all this is over a month away. So who knows where that area is going to be in a month, but it certainly seems like it's going to be a lot more logistical difficulty than they first imagined.
Yeah. Plus, the NBA got a lot of backlash a few months ago when they were testing all these or players with 0 symptoms.
Yeah.
So
now at least, I think the general public in most places are able to get a test if they want one. And so at least we're kind of past that side of things. You're right. A month ago, it was like, oh my gosh, they're going to wait until everybody can have a test, and that's never going to happen. And now, sure enough, a month later, there's just more capacity to test. And so we're kind of to that point, thankfully.
Could you explain the different kinds of tests? Where you're speaking about tests, there's the invasive nasal swab, the more or less invasive nasal swab, saliva test.
Sure. So in medicine, we always have a gold standard way of testing, whether that's, getting an MRI or whatever the case may be, whatever lab blood test is the gold standard. It's what we compare other tests to. And so in this case, the gold standard test is the nasopharyngeal swab. And so, I mean, you guys have seen the videos. This thing is miserable with this Q-tip shoved all the way back up, practically scratching the brain. And so that's the tried and true best way to do this. The problem is, of course, you can't do that to these guys every day for 3 months. They're going to be bleeding, and they're not going to be able to breathe on the cord. It's going to be a mess. So the other tests, all you're trying to do is you're trying to collect the virus, whether that's the virus from your airways down deep in your lungs, or it's the virus from the back of your nose, or the virus from your throat. The virus is going to colonize kind of that whole pathway of your respiratory system, everywhere from upper respiratory, which is more your nose, back of the throat, down to the lower respiratory, which is the lungs. And so wherever you can get some sort of fluid to try to find the virus is what they're trying to do. And so in this case, it sounds like they're going to use a throat swab, kind of like if you ever get tested for strep throat, they just put the swab in the back of your throat and wipe it around. And then also just testing the tip of the nose. So hopefully they'll be able to get enough sensitivity from that. And to be honest, most of the studies that have come out comparing them show very similar results, especially if they're going to be testing very frequently. I think it's close enough that it's going to be safe, especially when you look at, the challenges and limitations of doing the deep nasal swab every day. All these other different ones, there's even saliva tests where you can just basically, spit in a cup and that sample can be tested for the virus. So I think the specific type of test they're doing is within the boundaries of being good and safe.
And adding on top of that, they're also trying to use the rings, the Aura rings, that can get like temperature, respiratory rate, heart rate, as well as can it potentially detect whether you're within 6 feet of someone else?
So I think that's a different.
That's a different one.
Sensor. Yeah, if I understand right, I think that there's like a different proximity sensor, and I don't know if the players are wearing it as much as like the support staff and the coaches are going to be wearing it. Go ahead.
They were saying they're going to have wristbands as well as like rings.
Okay. Yeah, I'll be surprised if honestly like any of those players actually choose to wear these rings. Even though I don't even know if they have GPS trackers in them. But I can't imagine a bunch of these guys are going to wear these rings. It's, I think for the sake of how it's going to impact the NBA season, I would say minimal to not at all impact on this season. Because if you think about it, even if, let's say, it is able to do what they're claiming and predict 3 days ahead of time about an infection, you're still going to test these guys. You're still going to be testing them every day. You're not going to sit somebody out because their ring showed a spike in heart rate variability.
No.
You're going to test them anyways. And so it's not going to have, in my opinion, any impact on the current season. Now, it might provide good data to help kind of the general public that, there's all these studies going on in different universities. So, that's great. If you can get data that might help the general public to some degree, then that's good. But I mean, this is the NBA. They've got tests. If they need to test someone, they're going to test someone. So, we'll see.
I was going to also ask, do you think these rings and all this could be useful for first responders and doctors?
Yeah, the tests that they actually developed to kind of get this initial research, I think it was done with healthcare workers. I think it's through the University of West Virginia, I believe, and the initial kind of pilot studies that they were doing, I think were actually on their healthcare workers that were there. And so, I think the NBA is working with the University of Michigan specifically. And so I think all these different groups are actually using them in healthcare populations and studying them in healthcare populations. But again, it comes down to, well, are you going to tell somebody to sit at home for 5 days because their ring flashed?
Yeah,
or are you just going to get a test? And in a healthcare population, you're just going to get a test.
Yeah, and it's a lot easier to get a test as well.
Right. So I think if these, if this wearable technology becomes more widespread, where the general public is using it more, that, it's harder to get access to the test, then yeah, it could be helpful. But I think we're a ways from that until we at least see the data and what they're doing with it.
Yeah, for sure. Another big thing is masks. We saw in the UFC 249 fight that everyone was wearing different types of masks, homemade masks, the surgical masks, and the N95.
Yeah.
what do you think these players will be wearing either when they're at their hotels or watching other teams play?
So I don't think the NBA specified in their report, at least from what I've heard. I wish I could see it.
Yeah, I know.
I feel like the information we've gotten is only like enough to fill 5 pages.
Yeah.
And so I want to know where the other, 108 pages are and like what they actually say. But from what we've seen, it doesn't sound like they specify the type of mask that's going to be used, at least down at Disney. I think they specify during one of these early phases that it can be a cloth or a surgical face mask, but they haven't specified down there. And unless you have a proper kind of quality and type of cloth mask, I think specifically like at least 6 layers or more, you're not getting really the protection that you need. And so, we know that masks work. There's a big study in the Lancet that just came out a couple of weeks ago that shows that masks are effective at limiting you from getting sick from somebody who has it. I hate to say it, but I feel like we're for sure going to see players up in the stands, with their bandana or their mask pulled down over their nose, guys walking around with it just like up on their chin. I mean, I know the NBA is going to try to find people and have some sort of punishment for all these violations, but I just can't. I mean, being realistic, I just can't imagine that they're going to actually do that for 3 months. I mean, so I'd like to see everybody just wearing surgical face masks. I think that is a good balance. I mean, the N95s are really hard to talk in. Despite what people say, I've worn them, they are hard to breathe in. I mean, that's the whole point. They're trying to keep out air. And so I don't think they should be required to wear N95s. I mean, they're not in healthcare settings with high risk procedures. I think if they just supply surgical face masks around the campus, get the guys in consistent things, it sets a good image for the rest of the public, and I think is going to be sufficient to help keep them safe.
I think that's a big thing, like setting an image for the public. Because if you see your favorite player wearing it, then you're going to be more like likely to be wearing it.
Yeah, 100%. But if you see your favorite player, with a bandana around their chin, you're like, oh, well,
if he doesn't
have to do it, I don't have to do it.
Exactly.
So yeah, hopefully they're able to at least convince these guys that when they're at least in public, at least on TV in the stands, to try to set some consistent message. And the UFC actually changed. I don't know if it was just one of the commissions in Nevada whenever they moved from Florida to Nevada. But if you saw all their fights out in Vegas recently, everybody was masks up over their nose, good protocol. And so, it can be done. And I think the NBA will learn as they go and make the appropriate changes.
Yeah, it's funny you said that NBA players would just have it under their chin or like not on their nose. Do you think they'll actually utilize the anonymous hotline?
I think I bet someone will. There's going to be some story of somebody who reported that they, saw some player like out at some club in Orlando or something like that, and it's going to cause this big news story. I get it. I understand why the NBA is trying to do this. I mean, all of this stuff, it's easy to poke fun at. It's easy to laugh at the ping pong, doubles thing and be like, really, like that's your biggest concern. But if you think of where this is all coming from, I mean, first off, we have to trust all these experts that they're talking to. I mean, the NBA's got access to the best of the best in terms of epidemiologists and planning these things. And in sports medicine, you're trained whenever you're hosting an event to have an emergency action plan, an EAP. And that is intended to be extremely detailed, spelling out exactly what you're going to do in different emergency situations. So, if someone goes down with a neck injury, where's our spine board? Where's our AED? What's our signal to get the EMS crew on the field? It's a very important part of being any team physician and covering athletes. And so this is almost just like a glorified emergency action plan. And so, of course, they're going to make this as detailed and thorough and, specific as possible so that whenever people have questions, they can just refer to this. So I get why they're doing it. I get where they're coming from. It's hard to balance the practicality of telling teammates they have to stay 6 feet from each other when they're, practicing and playing and all this kind of stuff. But I mean, it's, Dr. Fauci gave it its blessing. And I feel like what more could you ask for than someone like Dr. Fauci saying, hey, looks good, looks safe, go for it. So.
Exactly. They went into a lot of detail over this protocol. And one of the points is including that they can't shower at the locker rooms, but rather at their hotels. You also said that this is maybe a little bit excessive. Is there anything else that you think that the NBA is maybe looking over or they need to address?
Not necessarily. I think the masking thing is one of the biggest things they need to be more specific about. You know, the showering thing, I think it's more about social distancing than it is about the risks of showering. You know, as far as I've read and as far as we know, this virus doesn't spread in the sweat. It doesn't spread in fomites or like fecal matter. It's, you know, respiratory droplets, respiratory secretions. And so if you think of just being in a shower, you're not like coughing on someone, but you probably have to potentially be less than 6 feet from somebody.
Yeah.
And so I'm guessing it's more about the social distancing side of things than it is about, you know, the act of showering being a risk.
Right.
Again, that's something, you know, are these guys really going to go 3 months riding a bus back to their hotel when they are just drenched in sweat after playing these games? Maybe it works, you know, maybe you stagger people showering or something. But I think they've covered a lot of good stuff. And I'm, like I said, we'll learn things along the way. We'll see things change from week to week. I think it's all going to look very different in October than it does that first week of July, just because they'll adapt, they'll learn, and they'll, you know, tweak things as needed.
So another thing I saw was like a bunch of young players such as Kyle Kuzma, Bam Adebayo, De'Aaron Fox, Donovan Mitchell, and Jason Tatum looking for an insurance plan if they get hurt. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know if they have anything like that right now in the NBA, to be honest. Again, I don't really see it as being too drastically different than the start of any other season. You know, athletes are assuming some risk whenever they play a sport, whether it's a pro in the NBA or someone like us just going out and playing pickup basketball. I mean, when you decide to do that, you're sort of accepting some intrinsic risk that stuff could go wrong, you could get hurt, and we can't prevent everything. You know, I don't think this is that extremely different of a situation to warrant that, but I also don't understand or know kind of what the precedence is for something like that in the league. I know guys can get, you know, individual insurance policies, but especially if you're applying something to the league as a whole and you're not really focusing or singling out individual players, you know, it's hard to see the league doing something like that, but it wouldn't surprise me if more players kind of personally go out and get some sort of, you know, assurance or try to think about how they might, you know, look at their deals for the future because of possibly getting hurt.
Yeah, and I feel like these players, like the 5 players I named, are players that are up for new contracts in the next couple of years. So I think that's why like these players are looking for like a plan that could like make sure they have their money safe.
Yeah. And you know, even if the season didn't restart and it took until December, that's going to be even a longer time off. So any way you slice it, you're going to have issues. You're going to have challenges like this, and eventually you just kind of have to go forward and see what happens.
Definitely. Now, going into the main issue of the whole coronavirus epidemic, if a player tests positive, they're going to have to do isolation and self-quarantine. What happens if multiple players from the same team end up being positive?
That's a great question. I don't know. I think the NBA is certainly hoping that doesn't happen. I think they're planning as if players will test positive. That's very clear kind of from their protocol, is they're assuming worst case scenario, which you sort of have to do. Okay, we know guys are going to test positive. What are we going to do about it? You know, I think their hope is that they can implement enough of these guidelines and social distancing and masks and, you know, sanitizing and stuff that they can limit the spread and catch it soon enough if somebody does get tested positive. Yeah, I mean, who knows? Where do you draw the line? Is it if LeBron James goes out for the Lakers, then season's over, or LeBron and AD are out, season's over? I'm guessing that that's not going to happen. I feel like the cases we're going to see are going to be few and kind of spread far enough out that I don't see that happening. But yeah, it's going to be a tough conversation. I'm glad I'm not Adam Silver if you know, this spreads through an entire team's locker room and knocks them out. I'm guessing they would keep playing. I'm kind of guessing that they would basically say, look, your team is eliminated if you don't have enough guys to put on the court and the other team just advances. And I mean, that way you're at least kind of getting some sense of a season and not punishing everybody else. But let's hope it doesn't come down to that.
Yeah, I saw another thing where they said like if something like this does happen, they would probably just take a few more days in between. Like say like LeBron does get it. Like I'm pretty sure like if a top player gets it, they're gonna do something about it. So say like if LeBron does it.
Yeah, I would think they would. The challenging part is, you know, if somebody has symptoms and they test positive, it's a whole other process of getting back to play. I mean, people are acting like just 2 negative tests and you're good, and 14 days max and you're back in the game. But there's a lot of additional testing that these guys are going to have to go through with a very gradual kind of return to play, particularly because of some of the effects that we've seen on the heart muscle with this virus. And, anytime we hear about infections in the heart muscle, that raises concern for, cardiac issues on the court, which the NBA certainly doesn't want. So I think if we see somebody get it and somebody test positive, it could be, multiple weeks to even like potentially a month just before all this testing gets done and they're able to kind of slowly ramp up their activity in a good monitored, safe way.
Yeah. So how do you think the hotel design separating by seating inherently a way to contain the spread of the virus?
So I think their logic with that is that they're trying to keep the teams they predict to go further, kind of in the same area, which it makes sense. You're trying to create bubbles within the bubble, basically. So that way, if, there's a breakout in the Bucks locker room, they're not mingling with all the other 15 teams so that now you can spread it there. They're basically kind of limited to their own bubble, so to speak. And so that's one way to do it. And I think it's smart that they did that. Again, though, if you knock out the wrong bubble, then you're in a whole other different situation. So, again, I think even within those hotels, though, guys are going to be separated from other teams as best as possible throughout all this. So hopefully they'll, if they follow the rules, hopefully they're able to limit things if something does pop up.
Yeah, I think they just want to keep it between teams. Like if a team does get it, I think they just wanted to stay between that team and not spread too much.
Yep, keep it within that team, keep it within that locker room. So that way, if you have to, you're just pulling one team out versus shutting down, multiple teams.
Yeah.
So certainly if you end up with it widespread, I mean, for safety reasons, they would have to call things off. But if they can control it quick enough, then, hopefully they could continue.
I think players, even if they're on different teams, might not end up seeing each other and hanging out. Do you think that would be the case, especially if they're friends?
I think initially people are going to be really well behaved and they're going to try to limit that. And then I think as time goes on, you're naturally going to start to see people kind of, someone's going to catch cell phone footage of, LeBron in the hallway talking to Giannis or something. I mean, something's going to pop up. Some story's going to happen. It'll take a lot of perseverance on the part of these guys. I mean, this is going to be a lot of sacrifice. It's going to be really tough for them. When the families come, now you've got a whole other group of people that you have to also trust is going to stay within that team bubble and not go mingle with, family from other teams. And so, you've got guys that are great friends in the league and their families that are friends. And so it's going to be not just on the players to, limit themselves, but also on their families to limit things as well.
Exactly. So now one of the fun nuggets of the NBA guidelines, when they're playing with cards, they can't reuse the decks. They can't be with doubles and ping pongs. What's your favorite detail in all those NBA guidelines?
I think the doubles in ping pong. I mean, maybe I didn't realize there was such an underground ping pong, syndicate in the NBA. Again, it's guys want to be happy. I see why they're saying it. I see the benefit of it because the problem is you can't say you can be 6 feet apart playing ping pong, but you can't be 6 feet apart playing Xbox and you can't pick and choose all these things. And so of course, if you have to kind of go all or nothing, they're going to go all on the side of ultimate safety.
Yeah.
So the fact that they specified ping pong, they must know that there's somebody in the league that's just a huge ping pong player. I think that was pretty funny. The cards thing, it's really hard to sanitize 50, how many cards are on a playing deck. It's hard to sanitize all those individually. And so, I hope they're not just tossing deck after deck of playing cards in the recycling. But I think the ping pong one was my favorite to see.
Definitely. Now, one of my favorite players, and most people who know me for being a KD fan. And I loved your videos on KD's injury. So we know that KD won't be returning this season. But if he were to return, what were the risks that he would be facing?
I think at this point, Durant is far enough out from his injury that assuming he's had no complications, and I'd hope people know this. I obviously have never treated or seen him or anything, but as he's far enough out from the standard recovery for an Achilles injury that that should be healed. I mean, he should be, assuming there were no big major bumps, he should be recovered and healed from just the standpoint of that local injury itself. You know, anytime you come back from an injury, you're going to be at risk of getting hurt, just because oftentimes what happens is you can almost over rehab certain parts of your body, because it's all about having good balance. And so a lot of the metrics for when players can kind of qualify to return to play is having symmetric measurements. So let's say it's an ACL tear. You know, you want to have symmetric strength in your quad muscles and your hamstring muscles relative to the normal, you know, uninjured side. You want to have similar range of motion. And so sometimes guys will almost over rehab the affected side, thinking, gosh, you know, I got to do extensions and curls and all this all day on my injured leg. And then you forget that you also need to train the other side to kind of hit these balances. And so oftentimes when stuff like that comes into play, it's because we see some asymmetries, some little difference from the injured side to the non-injured side. And I think really, assuming again that everything healed fine and he's medically cleared, I really don't think the risks are any different if he comes back now versus if he comes back in December. I mean, at some point you've got to come back. And assuming you've been medically cleared, which is the key, I don't see much different in him just waiting 2 or 3 months to step on the court. But, you know, who knows? There could have been something that kind of popped up that was still nagging him, or even mentally. You know, that's a big part of rehab with these injuries, is just getting that kind of mental fortitude back to feel confident and feel comfortable. So even if his body is physically great, he also has to make sure that his mind is ready to play. So, you know, I don't think any of us can really judge his decision. It's easy to be upset because we want to see him play, but, you know, it's his call. So
what should he be doing right now? Because if he's not playing, what should he be doing for himself for next season?
I think all these guys should just trying to keep up their conditioning and keeping up their activity to some degree. Certainly if he's not, you know, it depends on his specific, you know, little time points in his rehab and what maybe still is bothering him or kind of what he needs to be working on. But it's all about kind of getting back to that sport performance level. You know, when we look through return to play, there's kind of return to activity. So you do some basic activity. You can return to your sport, meaning, you know, you're on the basketball court, you're playing some 5-on-5. But then that last stage is really returning to your performance. And so Durant can be back 5-on-5, you know, playing pickup well, but he might not be back at his full performance level. And so that last little bit of that rehab is, okay, how do we get you back to your prior performance? You know, a lot of it depends on when the season restarts, because he doesn't want to ramp up too early. He wants to make sure he's kind of ramping up at the right point for the season to resume. But I don't think it's all that much different than the rest of the guys around the league that aren't playing and have to kind of go through these similar, you know, kind of unknown long transition periods.
Another thing for me was when I saw that like the league won't force players to play. So how many players do you think will opt out from playing like this playoff or just in this bubble?
Yeah, that's a great question here. So I think, you know, it's going to be hard to tell, obviously, with everything going on in the country, with all the protests and everything. It's hard to know really what guys are going to want to do in terms of their health, but also, you know, wanting to keep fighting for all these social injustices, which it sounds like, you know, the league very clearly supports and wants to keep them able to do, which I think is fantastic. And so, you know, I hope they're just understandable. I hope players aren't given a hard time for their decision. I think it's entirely up to them. You know, I respect whatever they want to do. Even guys that have health risks that might put them, you know, at higher risk of a bad outcome, that's fine. You know, that risk is for them and their family to decide. And I just would hope they're given the proper education. You know, I would just hope that whoever's advising these guys is giving them good, solid advice, whether it's to stay home or to come play. I just want them to be safe and have all the information they need.
So we saw Dr. Fauci said that NFL won't be able to return this season unless they do something similar to the NBA. Do you agree?
It's hard to say. I mean, you know, I don't know exactly what the NFL has in mind. You know, all this is changing so frequently in terms of, you know, if there's going to be a second wave, all of this could be totally out the door to where we can't even do bubble type situations. You know, I think all these leagues have different motivations, right? I mean, they've got bills to pay. They've got owners that want to make money. And a lot of them have players that want to play and players that don't want to play. And so I think the NFL's advantage is at least they still have some more time to kind of see what happens. And again, it's all about balancing the risk. And so as long as the league is doing what they feel is the safest and providing their players with the best information possible and then allowing the players to make the decision, it's hard to look from the outside and without knowing all the details and say, how dare you, or you should be doing it this way. Dr. Fauci, of course, comes from a place of ultimate kind of public safety. And so he's going to look at things as, well, what's the safest, best thing to do? As much of a sports fan as he might be, he's going to kind of always come in as we got to be safe. We got to do the right things here. So I think he'll hopefully kind of give them some good information. I don't know if they'll entirely listen to it just because it's the NFL and we know that they want to play. And how much money is involved. I expect they're going to play. Yeah, I expect we're going to see, nearly full NFL stadiums come the fall, and that's just the way it's going to be. So.
Yeah, I feel like another big thing with the NFL was like with the Texans players and Cowboys players, like Zeke getting it now. Like that just like they got like more fear now. Like before it was going smoothly, now they just got like another thing to worry about.
Yeah. So we'll have to see, as training camps get started and such, just what happens and how well they're able to kind of limit things, hopefully within those locker rooms.
So wrap everything up, how is the NBA doing so far overall with their plan?
I think they're doing great. It's like we said, we can sit and make fun of the doubles ping pong and the distancing stuff that maybe seems unrealistic, but I think they're being thorough. I think they took their time. I think they've really thought this through. I think they've talked with a lot of really smart people. They're getting input from their players. They're getting input from the coaches, from execs around the league, and they're ultimately doing what they feel is the safest. And so I think so far they're doing great. It'll be anxious to see, what they changed, kind of if anything pops up, what lessons they learn early on, and also just how quick they are to adapt, because things could change pretty quickly, for good or for bad. And so hopefully they're able to just kind of continue adapting as quickly as possible to really just keep the players' safety in mind. And, I think they do. I know it's easy to say they just want the season so they can make money, but I really do think that they're really looking out for the players. They don't want something terrible to happen. And so I think they're going to keep doing a good job.
Mm-hmm. I think all sports across, like I think Adam Silver's done the best job, like as a commissioner.
Yeah, I love Silver. I think he's been a great commissioner. So
I agree. Adam Silver and the NBA, they're definitely looking out for their players and the health of everyone in general. The NBA's plan in general, specifically with their objective data, is going to be in a Yale study. How can the NBA's Orlando bubble situation be applied to society opening up as a whole?
It's going to be very different than the rest of society. I mean, even within that city, people aren't, I don't think, required to social distance. And, I don't know what, I think just as of today, maybe masking is required now just with the spikes. But it's, I think what it's going to do is give some guidance for other sports leagues. This is going to be a whole different ecosystem, a whole different kind of setting than what most of us are going through in our daily life. And so I don't think we'll be able to really apply it that much to just, our general daily life, but I hope it's a good lesson for other sports leagues, even like the NFL, to give them some idea of just how quickly something like this could spread through a locker room, or to give them a sense of how realistic some of these social distance measures are. It's surprising to say that we learned from the UFC about how to do something for safety. I mean, I know they're safe. I know they take great care of their fighters, but I don't think anybody expected that the UFC would be like leading the way with trying to set a good example. And so hopefully the NBA can kind of keep setting that good example for other sports leagues and do the best they can.
All right. Well, thank you for joining our podcast and interviewing with us.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks a lot for having me on, guys. Best of luck. It's a grind, but I applaud you guys for grinding through and doing something you love. So it's a lot of fun.